But let's get to this breaking news into our station here right at the top of the hour. This is via NBC4 and Mark Seagraves, who is their reporter. He's, I guess, they're Eric Flack, like the guy that we have on from Channel 9 all the time. Mayor Bowser and the Commanders have the framework for a more than $3 billion deal to bring the team to D.C. and build a new stadium at the RFK campus site in time for the 2030 NFL season, which would mean, Danny, they're going back to the city and they're going to the RFK site.
Yeah, so, nothing is done, but it sounds like it's close. A couple other hurdles that has to go through. First of all, there's a D.C. budget process where they've got to trim close to $500 million from it. That's ongoing and happening before this budget can be. It's a lot of logistical things that people shouldn't really worry about, but just know that nothing's a done deal. But the framework of the essential thing, which is local football team playing games at RFK and that development starting sooner rather than later, it seems like it's about to happen.
So I'm just reading this like everybody else, but when I hear framework of a $3 billion deal, does that mean that DC is giving the Commanders $3 billion? Or that it's $3 billion total, and that of that, maybe Harris is going to pay for, let's just say, half, and then DC owes him $1.5 billion.
According to the story, the Commanders would put up as much as $2.5 billion, and the district would provide up to $850 million. Documents obtained by News 4 show. DC's funding would go towards what are referred to as eligible capital costs associated with the stadium and infrastructure for the stadium and surrounding 180-acre campus, including parking structures that will serve the entire development. The district's investment would be paid in installments, with the first $500 million paid out between 26 and 30 for various portions of the work as the stadium and infrastructure are completed. The other $350 million will be paid in 2032 through taxes generated from the new development to cover costs of the stadium or stadium infrastructure. AKA, first $500 million is an overlay. The next, 350, give or take, is revenue taken in from what they've built.
So I know that people despise and hate any idea of basically, public money, so to speak, any kind of taxes or the city paying for any of it. I actually think the Hogs, Harris Ownership Group, paying $2.5 billion as a team privately is a pretty damn good deal.
That's a pretty darn good deal.
If that's what it ends up being, those numbers that NBC4 is reporting here and Mark Seagraves has, $2.5 billion from the Commanders and $850 million from the city, I think that's about as good as you could ask for. Because, yes, ideally, Josh Harris pays for the whole thing, but he's not paying for a $3+ billion stadium. And there is a benefit to the city to having the stadium there. So I've always kind of believed in the process of both having some opt-in, right? And both having some skin in the game. I think Harris should pay for more of it. I think the billionaire should pay for the majority of it. But this is, even on this pendulum, farther than I would have thought. If you told me it's $3.3 million divvied up, I just said maybe Harris does 1.3, 1.5. The team chips that in, and then the city does the rest. He's saying $2.5 billion for Harris and Rails and Magic and all those guys, throwing their money into a pot, and then $850 million from Washington, D.C. I think that's pretty good.
As far as deals go, and again, I'm not an economist, and it's always, you can quibble with some of the math where everybody talks about, for example, new money generated. Is it really new money or is it just rearranged money? There are all sorts of accounting terms stuff with this that it's above my pay grade. But in terms of on paper, what we're seeing here of a deal for the city, because what you're talking about isn't really building a football stadium that gets used 14 times a year. You're building all the infrastructure, all the parking, all the Whole Foods, the dog park, the whatever. If you just did that without a stadium, that's kind of what it costs. Does that make sense? Like if you want to build the wharf, or you want to build the Capitol waterfront, you want to build this, that, or the other, that's pretty much what you're spending. Does that make sense? So forget it. Let's say the stadium doesn't exist. It got Thanos snapped. If you'd like to redevelop that area, tear down RFK, put a bunch of things there that people want, that's what it costs you. So for me, for the city, just based on this, that sounds like a pretty damn good deal.
I know from just reading about stadiums being built too, that economists are often really skeptical, or a lot of them are dubious about the whole tax bond thing. So like in this deal, Danny gave you these numbers, but I'm going to go back through them again. And if you're just joining us, the breaking news is that Mark Seagraves of NBC4 is reporting that there is a framework of a deal in place between the Commanders, the mayor, and Washington, D.C. over $3 billion stadium at the RFK site could be taking place. The district's investment paid in installments, first $500 million paid out from 2026 through 2030. Various portions of the work at the stadium infrastructure completed, so they're paying as they go over 4 years. But then the rest of the money, so there's still $350 million you're trying to figure out. That would be 2032, 2 years after it opens, still 7-8 years away from right now, based on the taxes generated from the development that cover the costs of the stadium and the infrastructure. Meaning, like, this is the money we're making on the project that we then reimburse back into what we're paying you guys. That's always a little bit tricky math, I think, and bothers people.
Yeah, that's fuzzy. But like it could be a lot worse. Like,
but DC will, I'm sure, go to the taxpayer and say, you guys are only paying $500 million, right? Like $500 million comes from us, but the other 350, this is actually going to be generated by the project.
Yeah, you don't have to. It's not going to increase anything for you. So, yeah, it is the. They'll say, well, look, we're only contributing this. Well, then there's again so many different economic concepts where. Let's say I'm building Danny's Emporium, and I want to build Danny's Emporium, and I need a big square footage to do that. At Danny's Emporium, I buy the land, I pay taxes on the land, I pay income taxes and payroll tax, the whole 9 yards, and money's just generated forever, right? As long as my business is viable and existing. The NFL has or stadiums have sort of a different animal. Or a lot of times you'll give a tax break or something like that, where what could be there and what could be generating revenue isn't to the same degree. You're not seeing any of that here in this language. Who knows if it's in there or not? I don't know, but it's one of those things where everybody gets to claim victory, and very quietly the billionaires are in their rooms going, yeah, that's a great deal for us, because they know that long-term savings adds up a bunch and cash overlays are, easier for them at times. Who knows? Point is, it's way above my pay grade, and it's complicated stuff where there's a reason these billionaires are so excited to jump in with any kind of public financing and forgiveness. But again, just on paper, this sounds like as good a deal for the city as you're going to find. I don't know how many billionaires and how many owners are going, yes, we'll do the $2.5 billion. Because not just to get $2.5 billion in cash lying around, they got to go through their own financing and borrowing and capital raising and all those other kind of stuff to outlay for the project. People have a misnomer about billionaires. Like they're walking around like Scrooge McDuck and they just go to their money bin and just, use the giant claws to take out money. It's an asset. It's like just your Bank of America account's got $2.5 billion in checking. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that's going to go into them forking over that cash. So that's pretty rare that you'd see that much.
One of my real frustrations has been that while this thing dragged on and it's taken forever and nothing's in Sharpie yet, it doesn't seem like, but maybe they're closing in on a deal. My point was 2030 is getting less and less realistic. At some point, something's got to be done. You need to have a municipality so that you can, get your blueprint together, so that you can break ground, so that you can build this damn thing, so that it can actually open in time for 2030, which is only 5 years away. I mean, it's going to take a couple years plus to build this thing. There's all kinds of red tape and things that need to be accomplished and cut through and done just to get to the point where you start building. And then you still need that needs to happen 2.5 years, probably at least, before the first game. So my point was, it is time to figure this out. We've got to start moving here. Well, today gives you a chance to do that. The deal calls for the stadium and the parking around the stadium, and there's not going to be much of that, by the way, so get ready to kiss your tailgates goodbye. Basically, though, the deal calls for the stadium to be finished by the fall of 2030. So maybe it's one of those situations where Washington opens up on the road to give you that extra couple of weeks. That almost always happens with a new stadium. But, maybe it's week 3 after 2 road games or week 2 or whatever, and they're playing their first home game. But the 2030 season, meaning the countdown is on to the end of Northwest Stadium, thank God.
Yeah, man.
5 more years where they can play their games at that terrible stadium that nobody wants to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And then 6 football seasons from now in 2030, if everything works out, this deal between the team, Muriel Bowser, Washington, D.C., $3.3 billion. You'd have a brand new state-of-the-art, gorgeous stadium. Obviously, the Rams Stadium, SoFi, costs like $5 billion. But the going rate for a really nice stadium is like a little under $2 billion. So 3.3 ain't nothing. I mean, that's what is the Bills Stadium costing?
I think it's sub 2 if memory serves.
I think it was
around 2,
$1.8, $2 billion, something like that.
I remember Tennessee's was similar, but to me, it's a big part is the real estate. Obviously, the location.
$2.1 billion is what we're looking at for the new Bills Stadium. So that's another. I understand DC versus Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Just where you're building in the city at RFK. I get it. But an extra $1 billion being spent on Washington Stadium compared to some of the new stadiums being built right now.
Yeah, I mean, just again, that the inflated price of the land and the deconstruction. Because remember, it's not just an empty field, right? You got to knock down a bunch of stuff, remove all that, build infrastructure around it. Who knows what the Bills had to, or when Tennessee built theirs, or you could pick your newer stadium. I don't know if it's as involved as what's going to happen here in Washington in terms of thoughtful planning that has to take place for this to work. I mean, I know that the smart people have thought about it. I'm just pointing out to all of us. In order for this to be viable, it can't just be we moved the debris and dilapidated RFK out of there, plopped the new stadium down, and said good luck. There needs to be really, really, really well-designed, thoughtful infrastructure to allow people to get there easily, those who are driving to and parking or whatever to be able to do that freely, to put all the different retail shops, Greenland, not the country, but like areas that have greenery and grocery stores, all the things that the locals want, that everybody seems to want as part of this.
Yes.
You've got to build this and design this incredibly well.
Well, we talked a couple of times over with different planners and people that were involved in the D.C. Politics of this over the last few months. And they've all said, to your point, you need to keep fields to keep people happy that say, I need youth fields.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a part of the 180 acres. Then you need your restaurants, your town center, your bars, whatever. Check. Now you need your hotel or two. Check. So all of a sudden, 180 starts shrinking. And this is where that Eric Flack report, remember, Channel 9 reporter from a couple of months ago, where there's going to be very little parking to no parking comes into play. It's going to be some parking garages for sure, but the tailgating scene is not going to exist necessarily. It's going to be very, very limited in terms of parking. That's maybe the only, certainly one of the major drawbacks.
Trade-offs, yeah.
But trade-off's a great word. You're going to be in D.C. You can metro to and from. You're going to be able to go to bars and restaurants and then walk over to the game in a way that you can't right now. The only stadium in the NFC at this moment where you can't go to a restaurant or a bar within a mile from your seat where you're sitting at the game is Northwest Stadium. Another burning question I would ask is there any thought to the facility being there? I would say no. I don't think there's enough space.
Not enough space.
And there's been some thought that if they end up in D.C., maybe you keep the facility in Virginia anyway, because a lot of the players want to live, further removed and maybe out a little more rural and get a little more space. So maybe they just build something new out west near Ashburn. Do you go to Bowie area in Maryland because it's a little easier commute possibly? I'm not sure, but that's another thing we've got to tackle as we move forward here. But this is pretty stunning and out of nowhere today here on April 16th, 2025. One of those days we'll remember forever if this comes to fruition. The story being broken on NBC4 by Mark Seagraves, he says that Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., and the Washington Commanders have the framework for a more than $3 billion deal to bring the team to D.C. and build a new stadium at the RFK campus in time for the 2030 season.